Kevin Gallagher. I live in the neighborhood. So I ride my bike about 40 miles locally. So I'm pretty familiar with the embankments, the canal. I have a number of questions. And the first set are pretty technical, so maybe it could be a quick back and forth. We'll see how it goes. So first of all, I'd like to know who the primary authors are for the guidebook.
So the guidebook was developed with the assistance of Bergman Engineering, with the involvement of canal design, canal construction, canal operations, NIPA, shared services, dam safety.
Did particular people focus on specific sections?
They developed the entire guidebook, so everybody reviewed the entire guidebook.
Mm-hmm.
So the people you mentioned are also the people who reviewed it and suggested changes and ultimately approved it. Is that correct?
In its draft form, yes.
Are you still considering the draft right now?
Correct. It's
Okay,
draft.
the current form. All right. Were any of the sources of information copy and pasted from other documents? Are there templates that you use?
Off the top of my head, I'm not familiar, but I'm sure if there were, engineering documents or other technical documents that were up to date, they may have been used.
Okay. So I want the document that I lent for a moment is on page 37. It's figure 3.2-2, embankment zones for vegetation management. So I have specific questions about that. I'd like to know where the zones came from. Shall I pass this up to you? Would that be the easiest way to do it?
So I guess in summary, the zones are modified from the Army Corp manual.
So the Army Corp was a primary source for the diagram, and members of the NIPA and Canal Corporation added their own notations and specific locations, like Zone 2. Just to describe it, it is the crest of the embankment, and it's divided into 2A and 2B. 2A is on the water side, and B is on the land side. I believe the intention of your project is to clear all vegetation to the water side from, I'm making an assumption here, is it the center of the embankment towards the water, including the freeboard?
I believe that's what's stated in the guidebook, yes.
So it's been stated that it's no longer a canal clear cut. However, I would consider removing all vegetation on the freeboard for the length of the embankment to be a clear cut.
Correct.
So you're trying to reframe the discussion about clear cut, and I personally see that as still being a large clear cut.
Right.
And that's the case for your other zones also, which would include 2/3 of the embankment on the ground side, and then a large swath along the toe. So I'm still wondering, the zone 3 and 4 are on the outside of the embankment, land side. Zone 3, it looks like it is the top third of the embankment. And that's including part of the crest. I believe you're saying that those areas would not be clear cut or not completely clear cut. Can you tell me where that came from, that the section that's not going to be cut?
So that is a modification of the Army Corps standard, and it's a modification in favor of leaving trees in what was determined to be a safe area.
Does the Army Corps of Engineers consider that to be a safe area?
Army Corp of Engineers would want all of the trees off the embankments everywhere.
So who decided that that was a safe zone?
The engineers involved in the project,
Okay. I'll go right to my question here. I have additional questions. The drawing shows, I believe it is the saturation zone. Is the saturation zone part of your decision process for determining where trees stay and don't stay?
yes.
Yes? Okay. There's also a mention of 3-inch diameter trees. And I'm wondering where the 3-inch number came from.
That is a general definition used by DEC to define what a tree is.
So anything below a tree isn't a tree? Is that what you're saying?
Anything below 3-inch diameter at breast height is not considered a tree. That's a typical definition used.
Okay, so that's the source for the 3 inches then. All right, let's try to go faster. These diagrams, they don't include the dimensions of the freeboard. Is there a reason why that was excluded?
I can't see from the figure exactly, but I'm assuming because it may vary in instances.
That's part of my point, that it's not part of like measurements or zones. You're measuring from the height of the embankment, and the embankments vary in height, and so that freeboard also varies in height with it. So is there any adjustment on the zones based on the height of the freeboard, height of the embankment over the water?
I don't believe so, and I believe there's a number of issues that may contribute to that, and one of that may be hazards to navigation of having trees over the canal. And typically in embankment sections, it's very narrow.
Okay, so people have asked, what is this going to do? What does this plan going to do to the property near me or in my community? We'd like to know specific areas, but it doesn't sound like you've gone into that detail yet. So there are some areas I'd like you to look at and come back to us and tell us how this plan, this guidebook will affect it, which includes Shown Place, Fairport, just to the west of the municipal parking, going towards O'Connor Road, the Great Embankment, and also out in Maston near the locks there. So that's a future feedback that I'm looking for. And then there's the zone 3, which is the top third, saying that it's safe for vegetation. Does that mean that you will be able to put in additional screening materials in Holly and Brockport to increase their screening?
Privacy. I don't know, Dave, do you want to talk about the screening that was already put in place?
Is the question supplementing screening that's already there, or just a hypothetical on the cross section whether screening could go there?
Yes, if it seems like you made a decision that vegetation, the top third of the embankment to the center of the crest, does not pose a threat. It's not unsafe. Does that mean that the Canal Corporation is willing to improve the privacy screening and perhaps improve the quality of the walking experience, biking experience on the areas that have already been clear cut?
The screening project that we had did that in virtually all areas where there was, like a house nearby or, concerning some of the more rural areas, we did not put that screening in, but we didn't really view it as necessary, and we haven't really got any complaints about that. Like, for example, if there was a half a mile of a field with nobody, living there, we have not gotten complaints that I'm aware of that, people wanted screens there. But if there was a home there, we viewed that as different. But, in general, that area, the top third of the outboard slope, yes, can accept screening plantings. We're going to have to take a look at the species and look at what we expect the root depth to be. But you gotta understand this typical section that you're looking at and asking questions about, you know, the whole thing has to be looked at by a licensed engineer, because there are variables that don't jump out at you from the typical section you're looking at. For example, how wide is the embankment? What is the freeboard? What's the outboard slope? Is it a 1-on-1? Is it a 1-on-4? All those things make a difference in terms of interpreting the typical section, making a determination what trees can stay and go. So it's just, I just don't want to leave people here with a picture like it's just a cookie cutter that applies in that is the starting point of the framework of deciding which trees could stay and go. I would agree with that.
So I have inspected, I'm not a professional, I have gone on site to view in Rockport and in Holland, and typically the screening that they have is single column, and there are some places where it is staggered 2-column, but it is not off the crest. So based on my experience, there is room for more screening, more effective privacy. So that's just a comment rather than the question right now. The guidebook mentions hindering of inspections. Could you explain how vegetation hinders inspections?
Excessive vegetation, you know, like we have in a lot of our embankments where, you know, we got annual cycles of leaves and branches and, you know, other debris. It just builds up, and when you walk on the slope, it's difficult to walk because the surface is uneasy. There's tripping hazards all over the place, and you are looking at, you know, some dimension of material that's a combination of all I just described that before you get to the actual slope itself. So you simply can't see the seepage that you would see very clearly if it was, you know, maintained, you know, short vegetation mode periodically. So it's not, I mean, it's not, I'm not going to say it's entirely compromised. If you have a seep that's starting to grow in significance and you take a walk down this, you know, debris-filled slope, you may find that seep, you may. But, you know, that's different than if it was a properly maintained slope.
Would you say that it is, could you quantify additional work hours to do the inspection? If it's hindered and it's not obvious, then maybe what's required is more time. Or perhaps it is a scheduling issue. I've been on the embankments in the spring, and in spring there's very little new vegetation, and the old vegetation hasn't put on its leaves. So if the idea is to inspect, perhaps it requires proper timing, 2 to 3 month window for your 5-year inspections, and also it may require maybe more time investment. Do you think that those would be reasonable accommodations to make up for vegetation?
I would say that if we apply more labor to the inspection process, then it would be helpful. If you were to ask me how much more efficient could it be, in other words, if we doubled the inspection force, would we then be able to, adequately inspect debris-filled slopes throughout all of our embankments? I mean, my sense, Ambrose, all the staff who does the inspections, and most of them report through Ambrose. But I don't know, my sense is some areas are so thick that you can't even get down to inspect them. You have to remove the largest debris and felled trees and other things to at least provide access. And it would just, I'm not saying it's not possible, but it would be ultimately very cumbersome and less than desirable. And I realize, that removing the trees is not desirable. I understand that. I heard that tonight. But let everyone fill in the blanks.
Yeah, I just want to add one comment on your timing. You know, you gotta realize that the canal is dewatered for that period when the vegetation is not there, but unfortunately that doesn't help us identify seeps. So when we start filling the canal beginning of May, a lot of times the vegetation is already starting to leaf out. So I get the point, and I wish, you know, you could see some of those in the fall and in the winter and early spring, but by the time we start watering up, that vegetation has already started to come out. So.
I believe that the Canal Corp chose to shorten the navigation season. So is it not having the water in there during inspection partly based on your decision not to have water there?
Can you say that again, just so I understand?
So the point was there isn't water during the spring. However, the Canal Corporation has reduced the navigation season, so it is shorter. If the water was in the canal 2 weeks earlier, that would increase your window for inspection.
Right.
Well, the need to inspect is aligned with water being in the canal. So to say that if you have water in the canal, you know, longer, then yes, you need more inspections or a longer period of inspections. I agree with that.
But that's not what he said.
Well, I think that they, you know, I think the answer is that we have staff committed to doing,
Mowing.
well, we have staff committed to doing other repairs during the non-navigation season, and that's been something that's been really stretched for our tradespeople. So that extended period of dewatering from, you know, from November until early May is when other maintenance work is occurring in our shops across all of our different trades.
So are you saying that the navigation season has been reduced because of financial restrictions?
I think that, you know, the public conversation and discourse around the season length has been about our ability to perform maintenance in the shops and in dry docks when the canal is dewatered, when it's empty.
Okay, so I have another question about the watering and dewatering. What effect does that have on the canal embankments?
Well, the canal embankments, as has been stated here numerous times, I mean, they've been in place and functioning for a long period of time. So, you know, when the canal's watered up, a certain portion of the embankment becomes saturated. And then when the water's lower, you know, the water table, if you will, or the percentage of the embankment that's saturated decreases. So that pattern of, you know, saturating part of the embankment, then reducing the saturation, and so on and so forth annually, you know, does that have some kind of detrimental effect on the embankment? Based upon the continued service of the embankments over a long period of time, it doesn't appear to.
So would you say that, based on your review there, that the embankments are essentially in good condition?
No, I would not say that.
All right, I'll jump to, what are the service life of structures? Expected service life. For example, locks and embankments.
Well, we have a northeastern climate, and if you have concrete and metal and water in the climate that we're in, you know, no different than, say, a DOT bridge. Now you can do things from a design perspective to increase the service life, but if we're just talking, you know, ballpark on average, if you were to say that, you know, a brand new lock lasts 30 years, I would disagree, that's too short. If you were to say a lock lasts 200 years, that's too long, it's not gonna last that long. You know, 80, 90, 70, with significant maintenance, you know, 1 or 2 times from the the time it's built to that point, I think is, you know, a starting point of discussion on service life. Now, embankments, you know, if you have a clean embankment that is, you know, don't get into vegetation, all that, just basically soil, clay, properly compacted and maintained.
Same.
Boy, that, you know, other than erosion or something like that, it's not, unlike metal and concrete, I mean, I think the service life is much longer.
So there was a question about widths and how that could affect your guidebook and your cutting plans. Do you have any consideration of the embankment size when you're making considerations about tree cuts?
Yes.
Could you describe those for us?
I mean, the essence of it is if it's really, really wide, the concern becomes less and less. There's other factors, you know, the slope of the embankment. Is it the same height as the trail? And then does it drop off after that? Where does the slope break begin? But generally speaking, if you have a wider embankment, you have less concern about the trees.
Are there any sources or information that we could look to and kind of figure out how that would affect the choice to remove the trees?
I think the Army Corp engineer document that James refers to has some dialogue on that.
Is that something you've referenced, or is that a source for your decision process?
I think, you know, go ahead, James.
No, it's referenced.
So that's a lot of questions, and I think that the questions are over, but I'd like to make a statement. Well, I thought of a question. You said there were approximately 200 seat locations, is that correct?
Yes.
A few years ago, the number we heard was 30. So does that mean you've discovered a lot more seat locations? Or were the numbers wrong back then?
Yeah, 30's not ringing a bell to me.
So is 200 a long-term number?
30 is way too low. 200 is more recent, but I would say a number a few years ago is maybe 150. So I wouldn't say there's a lot more, not 30 to 200.
So is there a list of these seated locations that you catalog them?
We do.
And are they prioritized somewhere?
Yes.
Yeah. And these seat locations, I've got to ask, how many of these locations are attributed to vegetation?
I don't have that number, and I'm not sure we could tell from all of them if they're vegetative, you know, a result of vegetation. Some we don't know, we just monitor right now. We've been monitoring for some time.
So, are there some seats that have been there for a considerable long time?
Correct.
Could you throw out a couple numbers, like decades?
Some could be a decade or so.
Okay.
And there's others that we've addressed and no longer are seen, so.
Do you have a cost for maintenance of the tree embankments right now? Like, how much does it cost for the region to maintain tree sections?
Yeah, I don't know, we could get that number.
I believe it'd be worthwhile to look at the cost of the current maintenance of the tree locations and your proposal of grass locations, because we don't really know why you're taking the trees out, but maybe it's the maintenance cost. But if that's the case, we want to know the numbers.
Understood.
Okay?
Understood.
And so I'll just state, because members of this this community group that asked to participate in creating the guidebook. And we didn't hear anything back from you. And the next thing we heard is you had a guidebook. You kept us out of the process after we asked you to let us participate. And now you're asking us for trust. This is our canal, and although you are stewards, you are not the right stewards. We need to find somebody better, somebody who's committed to the aspects that include community, historic, tourism, also have to be able to engage with the public properly, not the way you've done it until 2 weeks ago. And we also need people who understand all the aspects of the embankments. And at this point, it feels like we're going to have to do it ourselves, and
Most likely.
it's a bit disconcerting. Thank you.